Hello and welcome everyone to the Performance and Sports Science Study Group, where we show how sports science is applied in real-world scenarios. Today we have Dr. Ramsey Nijem. You may know him as the Director of Sport Performance for Kansas men's basketball, one of the greatest basketball programs of all time, Rock Chalk, former graduate. Previously, he was the youngest head strength and conditioning coach in the NBA with the Sacramento Kings. I'm super excited to have him here on call today to break down his coach's guide to counter movement jump force plate metrics. I was a graduate assistant at KU with Ram and got my initial exposure to force plates through him. He's someone who's greatly influenced my professional journey, so super excited to have him here with us. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat during the call. We might pause briefly to ask a question if it fits, or we'll just save them for the end. But then without further ado, I'll pass the mic to Ramsey.
Nice. Thanks, Daniel. Well, what's going on, everybody? In a moment here, if you have the ability to turn your camera on, then that'd be awesome if you could do that, because I'm gonna make this kind of casual. But like Daniel said, we worked together. I don't even know the years now. Daniel, what years was that we actually worked together?
Like 2020 to 22,
Yep, that's right. So on the way out
golden
with a
years,
national championship. Yeah, the golden years, no doubt about it. Um,
championship years.
yeah, no doubt. So we've been using force plates for a while, and we'll get into some of that in a moment. But this should feel super casual. And to the 4 or 5 people that have their cameras on, hello. And if you don't, and you're listening, even if you don't want to turn your camera on, if you have the ability to do kind of this practical that I'm going to take you through, that'd be super, I think, just valuable, because force plates can be confusing, but they don't have to be. And if you ever run into someone who's making them confusing, it's probably they're just stroking their own ego, because they don't have to be that damn confusing. They're just weights, basically. I mean, literally, it's just a body weight scale that can just do some other things with some math. Like, it's really not that complicated. So, my goal will be that on the way out of this, you should feel like force plates are really easy. And if I don't hit that mark, then we'll have some time for some Q&As. Daniel, I think you said that this is 90 minutes, but there's no way I'm going to take 90 minutes. So if you need to eat dinner, I'm going to get you to your dinner soon. And if you need to watch Thursday Night Football, I'm going to get you there as well. And if you need to walk your dog like I need to do, then we'll get there as well. So I'm not going to take 90 minutes of your life, because in the spirit of making things simple, there's no way that this should take 90 minutes. So let's get into it. Before we do, quick, maybe Daniel or Nick, did that screen flip over for you? Is it a new slide now, just to confirm?
Yep. Yeah. Who is this
Perfect.
guy?
Yeah, there we go. Who is this guy? I always start here because I never want to assume people know who I am. If you don't follow me on Instagram, you hurt my feelings. No, you actually didn't. But I just don't want to assume that you know who I am. I think that's fairly arrogant to assume that. So two or three slides here about who I am. This is essentially who I am, at least from a career perspective. Currently with the University of Kansas, been here since 2019. Met Daniel right after COVID, and 2014 to 2019, I was in the NBA with the Sacramento Kings, spent 2 years as the assistant, and then I was the head strength coach for 3 years. And then prior to that, some time at some different places, a place called P3 in Santa Barbara that you may or may not be familiar with, and did my undergrad at UC Santa Barbara, and also ran a community college program, was the director of strength and conditioning at a community college back in the day, Santa Barbara City College. And you will not hurt my feelings if you just open up a new tab and Google La Playa Stadium or SBCC Stadium. And I can promise you it's the most beautiful football stadium potentially in the world. And it's at a community college. And our weight room was outside at this place. So it was beautiful. I was actually very content with staying there for 5 years. I had started my doctorate the same year I started there. And I was just willing to sit there for 5 years and earn the doctorate and coach there. But Sacramento Kings called, and uh, I'm not the brightest guy, but I'm also not the dumbest guy. So I wasn't going to turn that down, obviously. So force plates over time. Technology has advanced a ton to the point where you're on a Zoom call now learning about them. But 10 years ago, a webinar or a Zoom call about force plates wouldn't have been well received, because the technology was just not readily available. A lot of people didn't have access to them. But now everybody has access to them. I literally have a pair in my garage. Like, they're all over the place, right? If you stop at a red light and look to your left or right, you might find force plates. If you stop in a facility, there's definitely going to be some. But in 2014, I purchased 2 AMTI force plates for Sacramento Kings. You can see them here, inlaid into the ground. We have 2 high-speed cameras. One is right here. The other is over here. If you look close enough, there's me with a the first generation iPhone taking a picture. And then over here is kind of where we ran our software, obviously. And then up here is two TVs. And all of this probably cost about $35,000. And that was mainly because our in-house team built this platform, but probably close to 40,000 if you were to like itemize this out. If you look to the right, that's what we currently have at the University of Kansas. And both of these plates cost like $2,000. And if you stop paying the software, they'll let you just keep the plates because nobody even wants their hardware back anymore, right? It's like the software is what's become most important. So this just shows how fast this technology has advanced. So they're not new because sometimes people think they're new. The first portable force plate was validated literally 25 years ago. So none of this stuff is actually new. I always put this caveat in. I am a strength coach. I love force plates, but Daniel can tell you when Daniel was with me, he collected the force plate data. And then when Nico came, who was with the Denver Nuggets, he collected the force plate data. And now I got a kid named Angelo, and guess what? He collects the force plate data. And if nobody wants to show up, I'll turn the iPad on. But my job is to coach and keep eyes on the athletes, and then we use force plates for some of our training, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So anyways, in the spirit of keeping shit simple, I like to just throw this up here. This is my goal. If I don't hit this goal, just hold me accountable. At the end, just say, yo, I'm still confused. You're terrible. And then I'll just stay on until we fix that. I do have a course on this. So what I have here is like 20 slides of over 300 slides inside of a course. So if anything resonates today with you, then that's probably a better place because for a few $100, you basically can learn everything you need to know about force plates. What we're going to do tonight, though, over the next 30 minutes or less, I'm going to walk you through a practical. We'll talk metrics. That's a typo. We'll also get into questions. But we're going to talk metrics so much that there's two bubbles there for metrics. So that's what we'll do. But I'm open to talking more about force plates. Daniel just kind of gave the title of the talk today. I think the Coach's Guide to Metrics. So I feel obligated to spend some time on metrics, obviously. So let's do a practical, if you guys don't mind. And I'm just going to stare at Jason because he's like right in the middle of my screen. So what's up, Jason? I like your hat, by the way. We're going to do a practical. If you guys will indulge me for a moment, can you guys stand up if you're willing to? And I'll just like follow Nick because Nick has to play along because he's hosting this thing. So, all right, perfect. So now usually this goes over really well when you're actually in person. But the reason I start here is because there's no point to talk about metrics if you don't know the phases. And so many people come to me and they'll ask me about braking RFD. And it's like, why do you care about braking if you don't know what the braking phase is, right? So that's super important. So we'll walk through a quick practical. This would usually take like literally 15 to 20 minutes in person. We're going to do this like in 2 minutes. So everybody start with your hands on the hips. The first thing you're going to do when you do a counter movement jump is you're going to stand very, very still. And the reason you have to stand very, very still is because a bad weigh-in is going to lead to bad data. I literally just had a chat with Luke, who Daniel would know, our director of Olympic sports. He called me and said, Ryan, can you look at some of our data? I said, yeah, let's do it. And one of his athletes had some ridiculous PRs and everything. And I said, well, let's just go look at system mass. And their system mass was off. It was a total outlier or anomaly. And so that I'd like just delete that. If you delete that, everything gets fixed. So you have to have a good weigh-in, which is why we start here. All right, now what I want you to do is just squat down to your preferred jump height or jump depth. So whatever depth you would get to, there you go, boom. And then let's just hold that for like 5 minutes. And no, I'm just kidding. You can stand up. But as you did that, you walk through 2 phases of the counter movement jump. You walk through one, which is called the unweighing, and you walk through one, which is called the braking. Everybody do it again, one more time. Boom, and then stand right back up. All right, so you went through 2 phases. Now, I'm going to call on somebody. If Caden, if you could run up to your screen and unmute yourself, I'm going to challenge you.
I hit it.
What's up, Caden? Where are you coaching at? Where are you working at?
Georgia football.
Nice. You a strength coach or a data scientist?
Hybrid role, more so sports scientist.
Let's go. I like it. 2 phases. Which 2 phases do you think you just walked through?
The braking
And
the standing back up was just the amortization into concentric, like the takeoff phase.
okay, yeah. What about on the other side? On the way down, what are the 2 phases? You got one, which is braking, and braking means stop. So what happens before stopping? You have to go. And what's that phase called? We call it the unweighing phase. Unweighing. Boom. So your 2 phases on the way down, unweighing and braking. During the unweighing, you accelerate. During the braking, Punchline, you brake. So you slow down to stop. So unweighing is accelerating downwards. Braking is decelerating downwards until you stop. And then Caden already set us up for the amortization or the transfer point, which isn't really a phase. It's just a split second. And then you stand up. The entire stand up is only one phase. That's called propulsive. And then you would jump through the air, and that's called flight. And then you would come back down and land. So your phases, everyone can sit back down. We're done with the practical. Appreciate y'all indulging me with that. So your phases on the way down are unweighing and braking. You unweight, which means you accelerate downwards, and then you brake, which means you decelerate to stop. And then you have to turn that thing around. When you turn it around, we call that a transfer point, amortization. It's not even a phase. You can kind of ignore it, but there are some metrics that we'll talk about. And there's a propulsive. So as far as the jump goes, there's unweighing and braking and propulsive. And then you fly, jump height, and then you land. And those are all your phases. Does that all make sense to everybody? Everybody maybe on the call like that I can see thumbs up. That's literally so easy. You unweigh, which means you accelerate towards Earth. It's just literally you allowing gravity to pull you down. It's like you versus the Earth. Literally jumping is you versus the Earth. And so the Earth gets to win during unweighing because it's going to accelerate you down. And then you say, all right, it's my time to win. So I'm going to contract a whole bunch of tissues to brake. And then I stop and transfer. And then you propulsively or push away, or what Kaden mentioned was concentric. I'm not a fan of eccentric versus concentric because technically those are muscle actions. So it doesn't really make sense for whole body movement. Because in theory, as you're going downwards, there's some muscles that are actually contracting concentrically, isometrically, and eccentrically, right? So, but Valve uses that terminology, so it's popular out there, right? And it really doesn't matter which software you use or hardware. The physics are the physics. So this is basically agnostic to that. So those are your phases. This is what you would see it as. This looks confusing, but now that we kind of talk through it, it's very simple. You stand still and you get a very good weigh-in. Then you unweight, which is accelerating downwards. We'll get into this in a moment. And then you brake, which is you decelerating till you stop. And then you jump. You go from the bottom to the top. And then your toes leave the ground, and we call that flight. And then they land again, and then you land. Within landing, you could break that up into more phases if you want to. We don't have to get into that today. And then just so we can kind of orient ourselves, on the left side, you have vertical force. The vertical force here at about 900 newtons is just your body mass. We call that system mass. It's literally you standing on a scale. And then over here, you have velocity, which is your orange line. And as we can see, as we talked about during unweighing, you accelerate downwards. So from point A to point B, that's unweighing. And you can see that velocity is increasing, negative velocity, downward velocity. You're accelerating towards the Earth. And then braking, you from B to D, you decelerate back to neutral or zero, which is way over here. And this is the bottom of your squat. Zero velocity, we call that the transfer point, amortization, or if you wanted to measure the force, where D is force at zero velocity. So when you hear the metric force at zero velocity, it's the force at the bottom of the squat because you're not moving. There's only 2 points, there's technically 3 points where velocity is zero during a counter movement jump. The first one is when you weigh in, right? You stand very still, no velocity. The second one is the bottom of the squat, right? And then the third one is at your peak jump height, which is right here. And that's where your body basically momentarily stops in the sky or in the air. All right, and we're gonna let Bobby Moore in because I know Bobby, so we'll let Bobby in. All right, does that make sense for everybody? As you look at this, it might have been confusing before, but does this feel really easy to understand now? Everybody, thumbs up maybe if it's easy to understand. We're done. I've done my job. We're good. But because you've already dedicated some time to me, let's just keep this shit going. We can breeze through this, I guess, if you want. These are ways that you can use them. You don't have to use them this way. Some people, you can see, I don't have readiness on here. Some people use force plates as a readiness measure. I don't do that. I don't think we need to jump before every single lift and then determine what I'm going to do today based off of the metrics from the force plates. You can do that if you want to. I'm not going to do that, and I don't do that, and I don't necessarily think that's the best way to do it. Mainly because any adjustments that you're going to make, you probably can pick up on without force plates. If your athletes walk into your weight room with poor body language, you probably know something's going on. They walk in and they tell you they're sore and they need a recovery day before they even walked in, like you know. Or because we're all practitioners and we're in the building, we were at practice. Like I know what's going on. I don't need force plates to tell me that. What I do need force plates for are things like profiling, monitoring longitudinally or over time, and then clearly return to play. Super powerful there. So we'll go through some of these. We jump every week. I don't use it as readiness. And importantly, it's just one input. Force plates are one input into hopefully your entire ecosystem. Like I don't need force plates to tell me that my point guard needs to gain 10 pounds, right? Like I look at him, I can see he's thin and he's not going to be able to handle the demands of the sport. Like I don't need force plates for that, right? So it's one input. We're going to breeze through a bunch of this. Profiling, here's ways you can profile. Radar plots are cool. You guys probably know all about that stuff. You can use them for monitoring. We've done a ton of research in this space. We've published our stuff. Here's a cool one, only because the next slide is somebody you guys probably know, especially if you're into basketball. But this is how you can use them for monitoring. This is longitudinal over a season. This is an athlete that I got literally at the end of August. This athlete came into us. We jumped him his first jump on 9/18. His last jump was on March 18th because he went to the NBA after this. During his time with us, his vertical went up, his efficiency went up, and his body weight went up 8 pounds. This is a solid freshman year for somebody. And it's also why he gets to go to the NBA. I won't play this because I don't know if the audio would go through. But this is Johnny Furphy. And did you guys see this dunk during Summer League? It's ridiculous. It should be the dunk of the year for the entire year. Like as we get into next year, this will still be the dunk of the year. But Johnny Furphy, but this was his data. And so force plates are nice because, again, this wasn't readiness. I'm just like, yo, jump every week while you're here and let's make sure I'm doing my job. That's why they're nice. That's Johnny Furphy for you, who's a great kid, by the way, for the Pacers. And he should get some run this year, especially with Halliburton out. Monitoring. Is our training working? That's how I kind of look at it. Here's another example. This was just from this past summer. This is a kid who came in who was a freshman. This was just our summer jump. So you can see he jumped. His first one is a 6'6". His last one was 7'24". And I haven't updated. We've obviously jumped more since then. But this was just our summer block. You got 8 weeks, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 jumps for this kid. So we maybe jumped 6 times that during the summer, and maybe he missed one. I don't know. But I do know that, again, like it worked, right? And someone's like, oh, do you know if your training works out? Yeah, here, right? It's that simple. You don't have to get complicated with this stuff. Now, the metrics, what we'll talk about in a moment, are always up here. So counter movement jump height, counter movement jump momentum. This is different than the efficiency one we just went over. Jump momentum just accounts for body mass. It's an important metric as you think through training and developing athletes. As you go to add mass to your athletes, are they handling that increase in weight well? Jump momentum is a nice way to look at that, right? Because if jump height was to plateau, for example, but your athlete gained 10 pounds, if you only looked at jump height, you wouldn't necessarily know how he's doing with that, right? But if his jump height stayed the same, if he jumped 20 inches and then you put 10 pounds on him and he still jumps 20 inches, well, that's a hell of an adaptation, right? He's clearly expressing more force and more power, and jump momentum will give us some of that because it's going to add body weight into that. MRSI is efficiency. We'll talk about that in a little bit. There's some caveats there. And then breaking RFD, which is not a great metric, but it was in my report. So there it is, a screenshot. We're going to get into all these in a moment. This is a study that Nico did, Dr. Nico Phillip, who Daniel knows very well. He's with the Denver Nuggets. Nick knows him very well as well, obviously, working with him there. He did this incredible study for his dissertation. We're at a coffee shop. And on a napkin, I said, what do you want to do? Like, you got a year. What we doing? He said, this is what I got in mind. To me, this is the best fatigue study to date on counter movement jumps because we really fatigued the shit out of our athletes. And the way that we know we did that is we used Connexon to quantify the objective workload. And Daniel will know because he's been here. We go through what's called a boot camp. And we just finished it. It's 2 weeks of basically Hell Week, the basketball version of Hell Week. So we objectively measured the increase in external workload, and then we jumped them and we hop tested them before, during, and after to see how counter movement jumps change during all of this. And long story short, jump height is actually sensitive. I leave this in here because people often say jump height isn't sensitive to fatigue, and therefore you should look at all this other stuff. No, jump height is very much sensitive to fatigue. If you fatigue the shit out of an athlete, he's not going to be able to jump as high. If you barely fatigue the athlete, he'll be able to jump as high, but he might take longer to do it, right? His strategy will change. But if you really fatigue them, jump height's going to go down. So are all these other metrics. And we're going to get into metrics in a moment. And then finally, return to play. If you are, do we have any PTs on here? Anybody that I can see? Any of you guys PTs? I should have asked that before. Or maybe you're just, or an athletic trainer, or you're handling rehabs, or you're a strength coach, in which case you got to handle athletic rehabs. Hillary, I saw you. Are you at AT? Nice. Excellent. Shout out to all the thumbs up for the ATs. If you have force plates, lean on your strength coach to use them, or use them yourself, whatever. But use them, because here's why you should use them. You can use them for something as simple as an ankle roll for a 2 to 3 day rehab. You can use them for something as big as a 9-month rehab or longer. Here's the way I look at it. First thing we're going to do, we're going to jump as soon as we can. Like as soon as my trainer says, Ram, you could jump him, I'm jumping him. And so if Daniel came to me, or if Daniel was injured and he was one of my athletes, I would say, Daniel, I want you to jump today. And then he would look at me kind of like I'm crazy because he doesn't want to jump because he's hesitant, because he's injured. I say, yo, don't worry about the jump height. Jump as high as you're comfortable with. Don't even matter to me. You could get off the ground 2 inches for all I care. Just do it. The reason we want to do that is, one, we want to get him used to jumping. 2, we want to show him that he can actually leave the ground and land and nothing's going to fall apart. Like, you're not Mr. Potato Head. Let's gain some confidence here. But then 3, you can track it, which is what we're going to show you in a moment. The first thing you can track are asymmetries. Every physical therapist, athletic trainer, it's their first question to me. What does the asymmetries look like? And then I just kind of circle back to, like, why do you care about asymmetries if you don't understand the phases? Like, why would it matter to you if I tell you that they have 9% breaking asymmetry if you don't know what the breaking phase is, right? That's why I always start there. Like, just know the phases, because then we can unpack anything from there. But asymmetries are relevant. They are probably oversold because we don't know enough about them, and they're very much nuanced, and we'll talk about that in a little bit here. But this is one way to look at it. And off to the left is this athlete's first jump, and off to the right is the athlete's final jump before we kind of cleared them. And you don't even have to be a strength coach to look at this and say, wow, that looks pretty good. Or you don't have to be a physical therapist or a trainer and say, wow, that looks like progress. I mean, it's literally colors. Like, red is bad, green is good, we're good. That's the first layer. The second layer, which the question that you should be start to think right now is, okay, his asymmetries have returned, but did his performance return? What's the point of being symmetrical if you used to jump 20 inches and you still jump 11, right? So we have to get outputs back. Asymmetries are good, but at the end of the day, we have to return them to sport. And so they have to have the engine that's required. Luckily for us, we can look at things. That's why jump height is an output. So we can see asymmetries were restored, or symmetry was restored, I should say. But it came with restoration of outputs, and he also gained weight, which is why momentum is up. So during his rehab process, we restored asymmetries. He looks good there. His outputs are high. Matter of fact, he's got a couple jumps right here and right here. They look like equal PRs. Cool. And by the way, he gained 8 pounds. Solid, right? Not very complicated. This, which you probably can't hear, is me talking to the kid, and he jumped 41 inches. We did an NBA combine about 2 months ago, I guess. And he jumped 41 inches during his rehab process. And that was me giving him his flowers, because I think when you return a player to sport, it's one thing to return them to play. And the reality is, like, you can return athletes to play, but sport is very complicated. He's still going to turn the ball over, right? Like, there's still going to be moments where it's hard for you to feel like I'm back. When you get a jump at a vertex, it's easy to get a win. And so I try to give flowers when I can. So anyways, force plates can be used for monitoring. They could be used for baseline testing, and they could be used for return to play, which are those 3 use cases. The other use case is readiness, that I don't use it for, but you can if you want to. All right, so the topic of today was metrics. So we're going to go through 10 metrics. Here, I'll do this just so I don't forget. This is kind of, I think, what initiated. Let me see if I could drop this in here real quick. There we go. And where is chat? Right here. Inside of your chat box is a link. You don't even have to take notes today. Just grab the link. It's all the metrics I'm going to walk you through real quick. So let's walk through them. Which metrics actually matter? System mass is the first one. I'm not even going to read all these because you're going to have a link so you can read them yourself. We'll just kind of walk through them. System mass. This is body weight. We talked about this already. Why is this important? Because if you got a shitty body weight, if you got a shitty weigh-in, you got shitty data. It's that simple. So just have a really good weigh-in system. The weigh-in system is probably hands on hips, don't fidget, don't turn, don't talk. And then whoever's collecting the data, they just have to hold them accountable to that. Because if your system mass is down just a kilo, then every other metric downstream from that is calculated from that and is probably wrong. And then you could run around your facility saying, I'm doing such a good job. And the reality is you might not be doing a good job, right? You might have just had a bad weigh-in. In fact, you might have did a bad job, but now you think you're doing a good job, right? So get a good weigh-in. Start there. Jump height, this is the most important metric because it's the single metric that everybody in the building understands, from your all-star best players to the coaches to the janitor to the person taking the tickets at, will call. Like, it doesn't matter. Everybody knows what jump height is. So start here. Please start here. And also, please don't put the damn jump height in centimeters. What are we doing? What are we doing? Just put it in inches. No, but your athlete doesn't know what 40 centimeters is. Like, just put it in inches. Give them the data at the level they understand. All right, so that's that. Jump momentum is the next one. We talked about this. It just overlays body weight. This is a really good metric, even for your bigs, to start to compare them, right? If you have two bigs that aren't the same weight but play the same position, and one can jump a little bit higher than the other, understanding their jump momentum is going to be a nice metric. We don't use it enough in basketball. Not a lot. We don't use it enough in basketball, but it's a more common metric in contact collision type sports. Basketball is a contact sport, but in collision sports like football or rugby, you could imagine having more momentum is important, because if you got more velocity and more mass, or you have the same velocity and more mass, then you're probably going to win that battle. Or if you're lighter, then you damn sure better have a lot more velocity so you can run into somebody really fast, right? And so momentum is just that idea. Time to take off. How long does it take to get your ass off the plates? This starts when you initiate the unweighing phase. So earlier when we did the hands on hips, the fraction of a second that it took you to initiate hip flexion and begin to go downwards, that's when this gets triggered. You can change the threshold for when it gets triggered, but it's basically just an amount of force that triggers this, right? And then how long until you get to toe off, right? So we mentioned earlier, maybe fatigued athletes, they might get to the same jump height, but they might take longer to do it. So this is a nice metric to start to look at in congruency with jump height, because jump heights eventually tap out on counter movement jumps because it's a constrained task. Your hands are on your hips and you got no running velocity or momentum, right? It's like literally you're just in place. And so because jump heights are like, literally our highest jumper is 25 inches, which isn't relatively very high. If you give the same athletes a run, they could jump 40 inches, right? And so because you're going to run out of room with a hands on hip CMJ, having some other metrics to start to measure success is important. Like, hey, you could jump the same height, but you did it faster. Cool. RSI modified. This is a very popular one. This is kind of your quote unquote efficiency. I don't like it, and we'll talk about it in a little bit, but you can't do a metrics talk and not talk about it. So here we are, we're talking about it, right? Reactive strength index. This is your jump height divided by your time to take off. A common question I get is, what's the difference between RSI modified or RSI mod or MRSI? All of those are interchangeable. So if someone says MRSI, RSI mod, or RSI modified, that's all the same metric. That's this metric. This is taken from a counter movement jump, and it's taken with time to take off because you start on the ground. Your RSI, not modified, not MRSI, just RSI. There's no M involved in that one. That is your contact time, and that is with a drop jump or a depth jump. So when you drop off of something, there's a contact time because you contact the jump, the force plate, and then you get off of it. That's the only difference there, right? Just to make it real easy. So because you start on the ground in a CMJ, we use time to take off because you're already there. There's no contact with the plate. You started on the plate. And then when you drop off of something, now there's a contact. But everything else is the same. We call this efficiency. How quick can you do something relative to how high you can jump? Peak braking velocity is another one. By now you're probably like, golly, there's so many damn metrics. Hopefully I'm doing a fair job contextualizing them, because the thing with metrics, you can get over 80 of them from the force plate. So it would be a huge waste of everybody's life if you just went through 80 of them. I'm gonna give you 10 of them, all right? But as long as you can contextualize them around the phase and then around kind of the story they're telling you, right? So if I go back, it's like, what does RSI mod tells me? Well, it tells me how efficient a guy can jump, right? It's how high he jumps relative to how long it took him to do it. And you can have an analogy of, I don't know, I'm thinking of like cleaning the house because my office behind me is dirty. It's like, how efficient are you at cleaning? Well, if you get the house spotless, but it took you 12 hours, that's not very efficient. But if you did it in 20 minutes, but it still looks terrible, well, that's not good either, right? So efficiency is this idea of good on both ends. So there you go. That's your story around it. How long did it take? Time to take off. Cool. This might be called contraction time as well. Jump momentum, overlay mass, jump height. How high did you get, right? What's your weight? So you have to start to think through what's the context of each metric. If you don't do that, if you just try to read metrics, oh man, you're just going to be confused because there's 80 of them. Like, what are we doing? And a lot of them are like super similar. I don't have it in here, so I'll say it now before I forget to say it. A ton of these metrics are related. Literally, like all of them. They all tell the same story. So many people, like, I'm trying to think through, I won't call anyone's name out, so I'll chill on that. But so many people will like I see it on social media all the time. They'll like list multiple metrics, and I sit there, I'm like, bro, all of these are the same metric. Of course, that one, if that one goes up, they all go up. Like, what are we doing here? Like, I don't need 10 metrics for you to tell me you're good at your job. If that one went up, they all went up, right? So most of these metrics are highly correlated. And everybody in here knows what that word means, so we can kind of move on. All right, so we talked RSI mod. Peak braking velocity, because we know the braking phase is when you begin to decelerate. Peak braking velocity is the initiation of that. And this is nice because it's how much effort did he give? If you have a very slow peak braking velocity relative to other attempts, it just means you probably gave a shit effort. So I like this metric because it's kind of a way to say, did this guy actually try, right? If your peak braking velocity is slower than it usually is, it either means you didn't try, it could mean something's wrong, or it could mean you're fatigued. But it's a nice kind of barometer of like effort. Braking impulse. Impulse is just force over time, or the area under the curve. You just shade all that. That's impulse. I got a question earlier from someone, and they asked me if braking impulse was average braking force multiplied by peak braking force, and to which I politely said, no, that's definitely not it, right? It's just the time underneath that phase. So I give you braking impulse, but you get an impulse for propulsive. You could technically, the softwares I don't think give you unweighing impulse, but you can technically get that as well. Impulse is just the area under the curve of any phase. It doesn't matter what it is, except for flight, because there's no data because you're not on the plate, so the force is 0. So that's it. Propulsive impulse, look, there it is. So what is propulsive impulse? The area under the curve of the propulsive phase. What's the propulsive phase? From the bottom to the toe off. Cool. Right? It, like, now you just start to kind of back into what's the phase, what's this thing telling me? So those both are important. And then it's not in here, but Hawkins gives you a impulse ratio. I don't think Valve gives you that yet. But technically you could just compare these two. And that might be worth looking at too, right? Like, how much does this athlete, how much force do they produce during the braking side of this thing versus the propulsive side of this thing? And should we compare those two? And you probably can, right? There's a note there, more reliable than peak force. Peak force isn't great. The thing about any peak metric from any of these from force plates is these things are sampling at 1,000 hertz per second. So the peak is literally 1/1000th of a moment that you're looking at. So I don't really look at a ton of peaks, but they are fun to look at. Like, I will say that, like, it is cool to take a step back and be like, damn, that's crazy. But more important is probably what they did during that entire phase or the entire jump, right? But it is really cool to look at, like, these things spike and all that. Force at 0 velocity. Okay, so we know the phases, and we know unweighing, we know braking, we know propulsive, we know the transfer point in the middle are the braking versus the propulsive, because remember, that's where you transfer from going downwards to upwards. The force at 0 velocity is the amount of force at that moment of transfer. How much force was produced when they decided it's time to turn this rocket ship around, all right? How much force is there? I like that metric because it's kind of, to me, it's like, I heard this word like 10 years ago. It's probably not even accurate, but I envision it as the amount of strain that this athlete is willing to produce or accept, right? And we see this metric go up when they get stronger, so that's beneficial to strength coaches. We also see this metric improve nicely during rehabs because it's going to be a product of the velocity that you entered in with, right? So as you rehab, whether it's in a simple ankle sprain where they didn't want to dorsiflex, so they're going to be very slow into that, or maybe a bigger kind of injury, call it a ACL or something, where they're afraid or hesitant to flex fast, right? Well, we can see that that braking velocity is going to increase, and that's going to have a downstream effect of force at 0 velocity will also increase. Because if I go down fast and I have to stop it to turn around, I have to apply a braking force to stop that, right? So it's this nice kind of strain / willingness to accept load. Center of mass displacement or depth. How low did they go? This is a good time to remind people that force plates do not give us motion capture. That's another thing I see on social media. People are like, oh, I can tell their ranges of motion from their force plate. No, you can't. You can tell their center of mass displacement. It's 2 feet on a plate. Like, you don't get joint range of motion. I don't know how much your ankle, your knee, or your hip bent through this. If I had motion capture, obviously I would know that, or I can use my coach's eye, although our coach's eye is, questionable. So this is a nice metric to just look at how low did they drop. There is no optimal ratio. With most of these metrics, there's no optimal or best. It's kind of like what's their strategy? For some athletes, you might want to cue them to actually increase their depth just to see if that increases jump heights. For other athletes, you might want to actually tell them use a more shallow strategy. See what happens there. I do this stuff with my athletes, and if it doesn't work, I literally say, "Hey, that didn't do shit. Delete it. Delete it from your brain. I don't even know why I told you that," and then I'll just walk away. But it's nice because you can look at this. If an athlete is stuck at 20 inches and it's like, Ram, I can't get any higher. All right, bet. I want you to spend a little more time on the plates. So just go a little bit lower. Let's see what happens. Sometimes they'll PR and they think I'm a genius. Sometimes they do worse and they think I'm stupid. But this is a nice one that you could just kind of cue around because it's like spend a little bit of time here. Some athletes need more time. Some athletes don't. Stiffness is not one on here, but center of mass displacement also gets brought into a stiffness metric. So one of the metrics is stiffness. It's not on here because now you get into the weeds a little bit. But stiffness is the amount of force that they can produce relative to the amount of depth or range of motion or displacement that they go through. Right? So if you can produce a shit ton of force in very little depth, that's a very stiff athlete. Right? Whereas some athletes need a broad range of motion. Those are typically your taller athletes as well, right? Like those light guards that look like pogo sticks, those are stiff athletes who produce a lot of force in very shallow ranges of motion or depth. So that was 10 of them. And now I give you a few caveats, and then we'll do some Q&As. And I'm going to get you out of here soon. The first one, caution ratio metrics. I mentioned earlier I'm not a big fan of modified RSI or RSI mod. That may be an unfair way to say it because the metric didn't do anything to me. Like, I don't mind it. It's just when you get into ratio metrics, anytime you look at a metric that combines two metrics, jump momentum is another one, you have to look at the underlying metrics that make that up. You need to look at the numerator and the denominator because a ratio metric is just two metrics, one as a numerator, one as a denominator. But you have to look at them to understand why it changed. Give you an example. If someone's MRSI or RSI mod improves, you might say, well, they're a more efficient jumper. Well, maybe that's possible, but we actually don't know that until we unpack both of the metrics that make this up. And in this example of MRSI, we have to go look at jump height and we have to go look at time to takeoff. So then we go and do that, right? So to me, MRSI is kind of the decision tree. We have to go down a little bit. Now it's like, why did it change? Did it change because their jump height went up? Yes or no? Did it change because they got off the plates faster, which is time to take off? Yes or no? You can have some athletes that can skyrocket their RSI mod by just getting off the ground really, really quick, but they didn't go anywhere, right? It's like, yo, you jumped 10 inches. Like, congratulations, you pogo hopped and your MRSI is through the roof, but you didn't go anywhere, right? But the point of being an athlete is to produce really good outputs really fast, right? It's not to just try to like ruin this test. I learned this from my athletes. We had an athlete who was literally the lowest person on our leaderboard all of the time until we decided to drop off something. And then they skyrocketed to the top of the leaderboard. And it was my athletes that said, yo, Ram, I don't know what this metric is, but I could tell you it's some bullshit. I said, why you say that? Because he's on the top of it. And I'm like, man, you are right. It is some bullshit. So then I went and unpacked the metric. And it's like, yo, you jumped 8 inches. You just got off quick because you realized you can win in the leaderboard when you do this, right? So just know what you're looking at. And you can say that for any metric. It doesn't matter. But MRSI is just the easy one to pick on. So caution ratio metrics. Just whenever you look at a ratio, just look at the other two. So if you have MRSI on your dashboard, then you damn sure better have time to take off and jump height right next to it. Because then you can contextualize it, right? It went up. Why did it go up? Caveat. Other metrics do matter. I only went over 10. There's like 80 of them. Do 80 matter? No. Do more than 10 matter? Yes. The answer is somewhere in the middle. But I would argue that you can get basically to the 3-yard line with like 5 of these metrics. And then everybody obsesses over the other ones because it's cool to talk about on social media. But it's like, yo, it's not that deep. How high did you jump? How fast did you do it? Did you need more or less range of motion or depth to make it happen? Now we want to, okay, what about momentum? Yeah, momentum because body weight. Like, did your body weight go up or not? Some people, oh, my athlete jumped 3 more inches. I'm like, bro, his body weight went down 10 pounds. Like, do you want a gold medal for that? Like, he just didn't eat. Like he's dehydrated actually. Like you actually should, anyways, right? So other metrics do matter, y'all, but just start with jump height, and I always start with body weight and jump height because those are so important. Because at the end of the day, we care about outputs, but we do care about the other stuff as well. And then in rehab, you could bring in asymmetries. The thing with asymmetries though is they're super nuanced and they're also highly variable, right? Like CVs, that probably resonates in here, right? Like you need to know kind of the variance of a metric because these things bounce around like ping pong balls sometimes. An athlete can literally have no asymmetry on one day, come in the next day have asymmetries. One day it was the right leg that was stronger, the other day it was the left leg. I would suggest that if you see that, it's probably not a big deal. If it's consistently to one side at 20%, that might be worth looking at. If it's below 10%, I don't know. Could we call that biological variance and that's just normal human nature? Probably. I don't have a threshold. People are like, what's your threshold? My threshold is basically if it's consistently greater than 10, we might want to unpack it. And did you come in here with an injury or previous injury? If so, let's unpack that as well. And you say, how do you unpack it? Just do different tests. The easiest way to kind of decision tree it out is do double leg or counter movement, bilateral counter movement jumps. And then if you have a reason to, go and do a single leg counter movement jump. Because I want to know, do you actually have the capacity in each limb and you're just choosing to have an asymmetry because you have the optionality with a bilateral? Or do you truly not have the capacity, right? Like your left leg is weaker in bilateral. Is that because you're leaning away from it? Or is that because you can't actually access that? Well, we can find that out by just picking a leg up. That's the nice part about force plates, right? On the way out, if you are a strength coach or physical therapist or athletic trainer, I have a coaching course called the Applied Performance Coach. I've been doing it for like 5 years now, and the fall cohort starts very soon. Some people on this call have actually taken it, so shout out to you guys that I see. Much love. And that's where you can go to find it. And that's it. And I got it done in 45 minutes because we started 2 minutes late. So here we are. Daniel and Nick, was that all right? Did I miss anything?
No, that was perfect.
That was money.
Short, simple. Any questions? We'll open up to the group.
No questions? That means I did my job, doesn't it? I dropped the link in the chat too for everyone that if you want those 10 metrics basically in your pocket. But if no one has any questions, damn, I really did. All right, let me ask you guys a question. If I can see you, thumbs up if this shit feels really simple now. All good. Boom. There we go. We did our job then. It's that simple. Don't complicate it because it's a rabbit hole. Like, and Daniel and Nick, you guys know, I mean, anyone with force plates knows you can spend hours and hours confused, and the deeper you go, the more confused you get. But the reality is, like, where you started is probably what mattered most anyways.
No, I really appreciate the breakdown too, because I feel like in my experience with it, a much shorter time than yours is what's the action that you're going to drive in the back end. And if you don't have a question in terms of even the metrics too and understanding the phases, it gets really difficult to know, like you said, there isn't like a good or bad, and it's going to ping pong back and forth, and what's optimal for one athlete might be different than another. And so just kind of having a question in mind going into and tying those to those metrics is also helpful. But no, I really appreciate the breakdown of that. The one question I had was, in your evolution with force plates, is there any other test that you like pairing with it? Like, you see things on social media, with isometric or IMTPs, belt squats, or any other or tests that kind of correlate with what you see with the output on the jumps.
Yeah, good question. Yeah, I focus on the counter movement jump, and I usually do because if you can understand the counter movement jump, you could understand anything else. Because every isometric test is, I mean, literally just push as hard as you can into the plate. It doesn't really matter what you're doing, right? If it's a calf iso, it's just trying to isolate the ankle and push as hard as you can. If it's an IMTP, use your whole body. If it's a belt squat, use your hips. Like, and even from isometrics, you're only going to get peak force or different rates or time points of force. Like, it's not right. It's not that deep. Those things are so simple. Over my time, let me see if I can pull it up on my phones in the kitchen. So I can't. When I was with the Kings, though, we built, I'm not going to say it was the first belt squat platform, but it was one of the early ones. And to this day, it still might be the best because I had our in-house team build this thing using the actual floor. I don't even know why they did that. They used, like, we had spare floor from literally the arena, and they're like, oh yeah, we're gonna build it with the floor. Like, dude, it's not that serious. Like, just put a D-ring and some metal. Like, but they did it right, and so it looked really good. So I think, back in 2014, 15, we were doing IMTPs. In 2018, moved away from that, and that shout out to my guy Anthony Darmiento, who's with the Warriors now. He came in. That was his first year with me. We did our masters together, but he came in critical of the IMTP and just said, like, dude, it's not giving you what you think it's giving you. Like, grip strength is a problem. We're not taping this thing down. We don't do enough pulling in our programming. Like, this is not what we need. So then we went to, like, the whiteboard, and we were trying to actually use our Kaiser belt squat and load that thing up as heavy as we can and put the plates on. But you can basically move that regardless. Like, with your hips, you're very strong. For reference data, in IMTP, you can usually pull 3,000 to 4,000 newtons. And the isometric belt squat, I've seen 8,000 newtons. Because you remove basically a ton of the confounding variables. Now, that was probably up until probably my time with Alex when he was here. So shout out to Alex, who's with the UFC now. And that's something that they were doing. And we brought that here as well. But then even that, I didn't really love. Because the big thing about belt squats is that you have to really cue the athlete to maintain a knee bend. Because if you attach a harness to the shoulders or the hips, they can turn it into an RDL much easier than an IMTP. And when they do that, then it kind of messes the data up. So I think in a perfect world, and we actually have it rigged up currently, throwing my force plates on a leg press and doing isometric leg press. And some people might be critical and say, well, that's not really applicable to sport. It's like, well, the point of the test is to get a peak force. So let me get a peak force, right? Like, let me remove every confounding variable that is not giving me what I want. So that's something we've played around with. But other than that, like, so I don't really have a great option for whole body force outputs because I think the current ones are limited, and then very few people are actually putting them on leg presses because it's hard to actually get that done. I do like ISO stuff though, right? Like we're dealing with an Achilles rehab right now, and it's like it's really nice to stick him in an ISO calf raise and just let him rip and measure that. The nice part about isometrics is that they're a really safe way to just monitor stuff. Like, nothing's going to happen. You can't move. And you're basically going to be constrained by your own effort, which if you're afraid to do something, you're not going to go as hard, right? And so that's an output worth looking at. So, yeah, Nick, I basically have a bunch of words and not a ton of solutions for you, but that's kind of my evolution on the isometric mid-thigh pull.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I think we got a
Yeah, of
question
course.
here.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Gerald.
Jump on in.
Hey, what's up? Jarrell here. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about some CMJ force plate stuff and just keeping it simple. Like you said, I think a lot of times it can get lost in the metrics and, just people trying to find or invent new things and find new stuff, or really just finding out, doing what works in your environment is best. Yeah, so my question is, have you played around much with any different types of cueing for your jumps? I know jump fast and high is like kind of like the, I don't know, gold standard or most common one that I've heard, but have you seen any real difference in different types of cueing, or does it affect certain people more than others, or what do you think about that?
We don't get creative with cueing. Down fast, up high. Down fast, up high. That's all we say all the time, consistently. And then we kind of let the athlete choose their preference for what that means, right? So yeah, I haven't played around with object. Now I'll go over and cue things, right? Like I'll go over earlier, like I mentioned, it's like, yo, I want to see if I can get him to do a PR. So I'll try to cue, like, go down faster, or this time spend more time, but get your head to the damn ceiling. But I know that those are just one-offs, right? And I would caution anyone from using a ton of different cues all the time, because now you're just looking at data that isn't the same data, right? As you cue it, we know that we've now influenced it differently. So, yeah, we just down fast, up high, like everybody else, hands on hips, and we just kind of watch that. If the hands are moving from the hips, or they have them on their t-shirt, and now you're getting a little arm swing in there, like, we clean all that up. Even if a guy is like hyped, if a guy is hyped in PRs, like, we'll let the moment live. Like, guys are excited. And if it's a really good moment, like I've done this, if it's a really good moment and I could tell it was some bullshit, I will literally let it live and I'll bring it in. Yo, get up out of here. Boom. We break. They go to practice. And I'm like, yo, Angelo, delete that bullshit. Right. I love the energy, but I don't want that in my data set. Right. But from a queuing perspective, down fast, up high is all we do.
Yeah, I think that's the one I've heard most commonly used. And I think too sometimes the environment dictates how what their performance will be like. I've seen people PR just because the coach is standing there watching them and they're, they have some pressure on them or their boys are hanging around them and hyping them up or, just messing around with them sometimes, which may mess up their jump. So yeah, I thought that was interesting and something I've always thought about. But thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, and good point. It's probably a good opportunity to shout out Nico again. We've published a paper on the effect of leaderboards. And so you talk about like people watching and that type of stuff. We literally randomized and compared jump heights when athletes had the leaderboard on the big ass TV in our weight room, where it doesn't matter where you are in the weight room, you can see the leaderboard because it's like an 80-inch TV in a small weight room, versus just having the output on the iPad, which was like individual feedback. So only basically the person taking the data and the athlete can see the outputs, right? And so social feedback versus individual feedback is what Nico called it, but that definitely has an effect. The more people that are watching, the higher you're going to jump, right? And use that to your advantage. Like put it out there. Let athletes compete. Chase, what's going on?
This is kind of like a tangent off of counter movement jumps. But if you're doing any sort of depth drop, how do you prevent that like slow lowering where they end up like going halfway down the box before they hit the plate instead of like jumping off plate? How do you kind of cue that to avoid that?
Yeah, good question. And that's an important one to think about. And for everyone else that's maybe listening, may not understand the question. It's essentially when you're dropping off of something, athletes, I always look at it as athletes can do one of three things when they drop off a box to do a drop jump or a depth jump. They can do it right and leave from about that box height within maybe an inch on both sides, right? You might hop up a little bit, you might drop down a little bit, but you're within reason. And then you have some athletes that will lower halfway down the damn box, right? It's a 20-inch box, but it's like, bro, by the time your foot left the box, you're at 10 inches. And then you have some that just hop off like they think it's a trampoline. The way that I've cleaned it up is just cue really, really well. Like literally have either yourself or somebody else. What I like to do is have somebody else do the demo while I talk through it. Because then I can easily say, while I'm commanding the space, this is what I want to see. Chuck, do it again. This is what I don't want to see. And before the lift came in, I already told Chuck when I say that, jump off the box or lower yourself. So I can explain what I don't want to see. So I think it's just cueing on the front end and then being kind of a stickler on it, right? Like if you see that they're doing it wrong, then don't allow that to happen. Those are probably the easiest things to do though. Like just cue the shit out of it and then hold them to it. The nice part about that test is that you can still collect the data. But if you think of like a squat jump, if you have a bad squat jump and they actually load, like if they actually lower themselves, then it won't collect at all. And that's where you get into trouble because now you're actually not even getting data and you're getting error messages. And now I'm trying to collect this data in real time with 20 athletes and it's like, oh shit, it's not working. The nice part about a drop jump or a depth jump is regardless of how they do it, you get the data. And so you can kind of clean it up in real time. It's not like, oh, it doesn't count. It's like, yo, this time. And then if you don't want it, just always tag it or make a mental note, delete that. Right. So like if Daniel was to do it and he lowered himself, I might say, yo, Daniel, do it again, but this time don't lower yourself. Like once you drop straight off, I'm not going to tell him that doesn't count. I'm just going to delete it on the back end. What else we got?
Awesome. Well, we're coming up on our 1 hour mark. Ram, we got two final questions for you in the chat. It's
Cool.
from Bobby Moore. Is there a metric that you initially ignored that you've since started using? And then the second one is with propulsive to braking impulse ratios, how would you interpret and train in the context of a lower extremity rehab?
Oh, nice. Ones that I've ignored in the past that I think I've doubled or quadrupled down on. System mass. Let me clear that. System mass or weigh-in. Like I've become more obsessed on that because I've seen its effects. Force at zero velocity. Visually or trying to appreciate, does their peak force occur close to force at zero velocity? Because that's typically where we want to see peak force to occur at. It doesn't have to happen exactly at it, and so you can look at that, but it should happen within reason around that, right? Like at this moment that they're transferring, is that also their peak force? If there's a big discrepancy there, that might tell you something. As far as propulsive braking impulse ratio, how would you interpret and train in the context of a lower extremity rehab? Bobby, I would just go to their baseline data. And we know, generally speaking, I just look at the baseline data, the healthy data is where we want to get people back to. That may not be good enough. The reality is they got hurt for a reason. So it's possible that their baseline data, there was issues there, and that's why injuries happen. It's also possible that was irrelevant because shit happens, right? Like we know injuries just happen sometimes. But I would try to get them back to their previously injured impulse ratio. And typically what you're going to get is that braking is going to take a little bit longer to get back to because you need to be more rapid there, right? Propulsive is a little bit more constrained because the reality is as you chase jump height, you have to get off the ground fast because takeoff velocity determines jump height. There's actually, I'm in the rabbit hole right now of some of this stuff. And a study that I have, they cued athletes to a 20% jump height. So just jump to like 20% effort versus a max. And propulsive time was fairly similar between those, but it was the braking that changed actually. And that makes sense because you can't jump slow. Like you can't leave the ground slow because if you leave the ground slow, you're not going to get off the ground, right? So that's kind of constrained. But I would look at that and then I would track which one of these, because it's a ratio metric, you have to look at both of them. As we chase this impulse ratio back to where it was before, which side of this thing, braking or propulsive, is the one that is not getting back to where it needs to be? And typically that's going to be your braking. And then we're just going to train that, right? Like, what we didn't talk today about is like all the training implications, because then we're getting into like hours of lecture. But each of these phases can have specific targets on the training side. And then we just go and do those things. We program those things and then we just reassess them. So that's how I would look at that. I think that's it. Shout out to Bobby too.
Thank you, Ramsey, so much for your time. Thank you all for listening. Ramsey, you have anything else you want to plug?
No, that's it. The link is in the chat for you guys if you want that metrics thing. It's free. And there's a force plate course if you love force plates, you want to know more about it. And then if you're a coach and you want to do that, then that's starting soon as well. But find me on Instagram and stay connected.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. We'll leave the links in our recording too for you guys to refer to. But yeah, thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you guys next time.